Number 10. Medellin, Colombia. Medellin, a city that presents the fun culture of Colombia front as well as facility with all the salsa dance workshops as well as clubs you can go to, a lot of attractive tracks to trek, and also bunches as well as tons of coffee house to be had. It is likewise referred to as the place that was the stage of the drug lord, Pablo Escobar, and also his reign of terror that was featured in a popular Netflix collection, Narcos. You will certainly find many remnants of Pablo Escobar left from that era throughout Medellin. As a matter of fact, you can even go on one of the many Pablo Escobar trips as well as go to these places to see them with your own eyes. From complimentary salsa workshop to all the nature to be had in Medellin, it is difficult not to love this city, and also if you are trying to find a great area to visit in South America, make certain to stop by Medellin. Number 9. Cartagena, Colombia. Cartagena is an early American city on the north shore of Colombia. It is possibly among the most photogenic colonial towns in Colombia, filled with spectacular designs, vivid roads, as well as a wealth of scrumptious fresh food you can indulge yourself in. Along the old town location, you will find lots of stunning colonial designs from the walls of Cartagena to the colorful Cartagena Sanctuary. You can additionally sit and also kick back at several outside restaurants around Plaza Santo Domingo or look for some keepsakes at Las Bavadas Market. For a more tropical and also easygoing experience in Colombia, Cartagena is definitely worth a see. You can also do numerous side trips from Cartagena, such as going to Santa Marta, Tayrona National Park, or take on the 5 days long Lost City expedition. Altogether, you can invest anywhere from 2 to 3 days in Cartagena if you desire to do whatever the city needs to offer. Number 8. Salento, Colombia. Salento is where the journey goes to in Colombia. Salento is house to the fantastic Valle del Cocora Valley, where you will be able to trek amongst all these high-hand trees that are distinct to this region. Honestly, I have never seen anything quite like it. To do Salento's justice, you will certainly need to spend at least 2 evenings in Salento as well as invest your whole day hiking the loop route at Valle del Cocora, approximately the Finca Acaime, where you can relax, have a nice warm coffee break, as well as observe the attractive hummingbirds up close. The path should proceed down in the direction of Cocora Valley, and that is where you will certainly find all the high-hand trees spread throughout an open valley. It actually is among the most stunning views in Colombia, and also Salento most definitely is entitled to a spot on the listing of areas you intend to see in South America. Number 7. The Amazon Forest. Being able to go bushwhacking around the Amazon rainforest, seeing an actual anaconda consuming birds, as well as learning about the Amazon Society of the indigenous individuals living off this untamed rainforest, is one of the most effective points you can in South America, and it would certainly be a pity to not include this on this checklist. The Amazon jungle covers an area of 5,500,000 square km, 2,100,000 square miles, across 9 countries. Some of the simplest areas to visit the Amazon forest are Brazil, Peru, and Ecuador, with superb vacationer infrastructure to support us, visitors. The tours of the Amazon woodland frequently consist of staying in a treehouse lodge, traversing the rivers of the Amazon, going to the Aboriginal villages, going on night safaris, as well as bushwhacking through the Amazon woodland searching for anaconda. It is an unbelievable experience that you must not miss out on when you remain in South America. I personally went to the Amazon forest in Ecuador, but you can either do it from Peru or Brazil as well. Number 6. The Galapagos Island, Ecuador. Checking out the Galapagos will be among the most effective trips you will certainly ever before make in your life. You will probably see even more wild animals at the Galapagos Island, greater than a year of taking a trip in other places, or a lot more. Sure, it is expensive, yet trust me, you will certainly not regret it. There's no place in the world that is fairly like the Galapagos. You will be swimming with sea turtles, seals, and also sharks, while walking an island full of birds and iguanas, stand up close with nature, without these remarkable pets running away. What I located most sensible is a 6 days cruise that most likely to Puerto Villamil, around Isla Isabela, a stop at Isla Fernandina, going to the Black and also Red Sand coastlines along the way, go across the equator line as well as around Volcan Wolf, and also last stop at North Seymour Island prior to going back to Puerto Arroyo. They are so used to the ideal condition of the Galapagos that the view of human beings strolling around them does not frighten them anymore, which is something that you don't see every day. Number 5. Cuenca, Ecuador. Cuenca is an old Spanish negotiation that was founded in the 16th century during the early American duration of South America, as well as with such an abundant history and also strong European impact. You will be able to see a few of the most photogenic European-style architectures in the country below. Walking around Cuenca advised me of the time I was in Seville, Spain. Unlike other cities in Ecuador, Cuenca has a lively and easygoing ambience, making it one of the best areas to relax from the bustling cities of Quito as well as Guayaquil. Number 4. Huaraz, Peru. Huaraz is my favorite hiking area in South America, hands down. The most lovely parts of the Andes Hill lie right here in Huaraz, and if you enjoy hiking, there is no better place to be in South America than here. Due to its closeness to the Andes mountain, you will have a lot of options when it involves trekking tracks. For a day trip, you can invest a day and also walking to Laguna 69, among the most effective day walkings you can do in Peru. If you do not have experience on towering mountaineering and are wanting to learn at some time, Huaraz is the most effective location to do that. If you are searching for an extra adventurous task to do in Huaraz, you can take place an ice climbing up scenic tour, hike the 4 days Santa Cruz path, or spend 10 days traveling the Haihuash path, which is taken into consideration to be among the very best walks on the planet. On your 4th day or 5th day, you can either relax a little bit or take place another trip that goes up to the Pastoruri Glacier. Even if you are not into hiking, there are several excursions you can make to see lots of attractive nature places such as the Pastoruri Glacier, or you can invest a day relaxing in the mountain community of Huaraz, where there are no shortage of beautiful mountain site cafes as well as restaurants for you to indulge on your own in. Number 3. Huacachina, Peru. Huacachina is a photogenic oasis community in Ica where you can invest a day relaxing by the tiny oasis lake, hike around the dune, and also enjoy the sundown over the desert landscape of Ica. Ica is also close to Nazca, a town where you will certainly have the ability to take to the sky and also fly over the strange Nazca lines. Considering that Ica lies in between Lima as well as Cusco, the location produces an excellent natural stop before you make your method to Cusco as well as beyond. Number 2. Cusco, Peru. Cusco is one magnificent city but a hell of a ride to get to as well as from. The city is located up in the Andes Hill at around 3,600 m over sea level, and also it took me 15 hours to obtain travel by land from Nazca to Cusco. Given that it is so high up in the mountain, the elevation can be a trouble, and also I very suggest you take it slow when you first show up in Cusco. Thankfully, there are lots of points you can do below. From see the major square, Plaza de Armas, as well as walking the crisscrossing streets of Cusco as well as up the San Cristobal Church, to going on an excursion as well as trek the Rainbow Mountain, Cusco is a must-visit city when you are in South America. Number 1. Machu Picchu, Peru. Machu Picchu requires no intro from me. It is just one of the 7 wonders of the world, and it is the primary reason several tourists wouldn't mind tolerating the 15 hours bus ride to Cusco so that they might see this place with their own eyes. There are numerous ways you can take a trip to Machu Picchu. Several opt in for a 4 days trek to Machu Picchu, which is just one of the very best ways to arrive, or if you are not right into trekking, you can also take a train there too. Machu Picchu is massive, and also you can spend from 4 hours to 7 hours just trekking along one of the many trails as well as taking a look at all the point of views inside. Many people will do it as an excursion in Cusco.